discussed UFOs and the Blue Room several times.
What Barry wanted to do is get in and find out what did they have. What could they say when he say he was turned down? I'm sure that had I gone to them and said I'd like to go in there, what's the useful purpose? You know, we couldn't come out and talk about that sort of thing and say, well, here's what we saw. First place, somebody would say we were lying, and it would serve no useful purpose, I think.
Cannon, who also was an Air Force general, thinks Congress would have been told if crashed saucers had ever been recovered, but concedes that such secrets could be kept from Congress and the public.
Well, they've kept some pretty good secrets over a period of time, and so I'd have to say that I'd have to believe that secrets like that could be kept.
Getting copies of government UFO documents can also be a daunting task, in spite of the Freedom of Information Act. Simply put, if the government doesn't want you to see a file, you won't.
There's no question that agencies of the United States government have been withholding, on a regular, clear-cut basis, data about flying saucers, among them the CIA and the National Security Agency.
Today, 99.9% of all UFO government documents are available in the National Archives.
UFO debunkers like Phil Klass somewhat naively assume that the government has no interest in hiding UFO files because there's nothing in them. That view is not borne out by experience. The FBI, for instance, vigorously and repeatedly denied having any UFO files or any interest in the subject. But when the Freedom of Information Act was passed, the G-men reluctantly coughed up 2,000 pages of UFO documents, dating back to the very beginning of the modern UFO era. Write to the CIA to ask for its UFO files, and you'll be told the agency hasn't collected UFO information since the 50s. Yet official documents from the 70s and beyond refer to CIA UFO experts, CIA UFO studies, and the CIA monitoring the UFO situation. Military officials have also been caught telling UFO lies. Both the Air Force and the RAND Corporation denied any knowledge of a secret UFO study commissioned by the Pentagon. Yet, here it is. The RAND study acknowledged the reality of UFOs and said that a solution to the UFO mystery was a matter of the highest urgency.
The National Security Agency, the CIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, FBI, many other agencies are withholding thousands of pages of documents on UFOs in the interest of national security. They admit that. For decades now, since the 1940s, all those agencies I've just referred to have denied any sort of serious involvement in UFO research. So they've been lying to us about that.
In addition to lying about the existence of UFO documents, government agencies routinely censor those UFO files which they are forced to release.
The trouble is, as you start to go through this document, you rather quickly find that a lot of it isn't really there. And I won't stop because you'll see how many pages are really full of good information.
Trying to get files declassified can be all but impossible. Appeals to the FBI, for example, can drag on for 3 to 4 years. The Department of Energy says it could take up to 7 years to obtain some of its sensitive UFO-related material. The National Archives has a backlog of 325 million documents awaiting declassification. Agencies are able to hide behind this log jam, using it as an excuse to withhold or stall the release of UFO information. More disturbing than censorship, false denials, and stall tactics is government-sanctioned disinformation, which seemingly flows back to the CIA's Robertson panel. A recommendation that UFOs be demystified inspired intelligence agencies to muddy the flying saucer waters. Today, there are even officially published rules for how deception programs should be carried out in order to provide cover stories for secret military projects.
Disinformation is a diversion away from the truth. Our method of protecting information is essentially to dilute it with so much garbage that it is extremely difficult for an outsider without access to know what's good and what isn't.
Bill Moore should know all about disinformation efforts. He admits that he was part of one in the 1980s, working hand in hand with Air Force intelligence in a scheme to discredit a UFO researcher, a man who subsequently suffered a mental breakdown. Moore defends his motives.
My involvement was only with the motive of learning how the process worked, who was involved with it, and ultimately, if I could, what was behind it. Why is the government doing this kind of thing? I never did quite learn why, but I did learn who, and I learned a great deal about how.
Moore is also at the center of what many consider to be the ultimate UFO deception, the MJ-12 affair. A copy of the so-called MJ-12 document was sent anonymously to Bill Moore's associate. It purports to be a briefing paper prepared for President Eisenhower, explaining that crashed saucers and alien bodies have been recovered and that a secret organization of a dozen scientists and officials had been appointed to study and control all UFO material. MJ-12. Most UFO researchers consider the MJ-12 document to be a fake. The Air Force has finally issued a formal statement saying the document is not genuine. However, the details inside the paper aren't so easily dismissed.
More than 30 different pieces of information, little details that we didn't know before we got the documents, which were received in December 1984, but turned out to be true. And it really boggles the mind how somebody could have known those things.
If they're real, then they speak for themselves. If they're not real, then they are an extremely elaborate and sophisticated hoax, which, in my opinion, can only have been created by someone inside the government, because there are things in those documents that weren't in the public domain at the time the documents came to us.
Stan Friedman spent several months and thousands of dollars trying to verify the MJ-12 paper. He says he found nothing which would automatically discredit it and remains convinced that MJ-12, or something like it, is very real.
But I'm convinced that there is such a group, and if there isn't, we've made a terrible mistake. Because presidents and intelligence agencies need a group like that.
Jacques Vallée was one of the first writers to suggest that the government might be deeply involved in UFO disinformation. Today, he says, there is ample evidence that such programs continue.
What intrigued me was that those people had linked to psychological warfare activities of the military, which opens the way to the speculation that perhaps the belief in UFOs can be manipulated as part of psychological warfare exercises.
The long and winding paper trail clearly shows that our government in its various forms spies on UFO researchers, infiltrates UFO groups, lies about UFO documents, censors UFO files, threatens UFO witnesses, and weaves vast and elaborate UFO deception programs aimed at confusing and misleading the American public and the rest of the world. The government is acting in the view of many like a frightened child, afraid to face the truth. What are they afraid of, and why can't we be told? More on that as we continue.
In the United States, any person who comes into contact with extraterrestrial beings or material can be locked up for an indefinite period.